Hello, today I am painting these miniatures. I believe they are Corvus Cabal from Warhammer. I have made very simple bases with little bits of stone and grit and things like that, and I have sprayed them entirely black. No zenithal or anything today. I'm going to go for a fairly low saturation, dark shadows sort of finish, so I don't need anything too bright or vibrant. I'm going to start with dry brushing the bases, because that will mean I don't have to worry about making any mess or anything with the dry brushing. So very dark brown. Then I will do a grey, because I'm going for a fairly low saturation and it's the base, I don't want it to stand out in any way. And this is what it looks like once all the bases are painted in that way. I'm planning on doing everything in stages, so I will do all of the bases, and now I will do all of this material, mostly trousers. There are some kind of vest tops and things as well. I'm going to paint it by painting everything with a dark blue. This is, I believe, dark sea blue from Vallejo to be specific. I'll be using the black primer as the darkest shadow, so I will not be painting in all of the recesses, and that will allow me to, even with just the one coat of paint, to already have an element of contrast. Once I've got that down, I'm going to go over with the first highlight colour, as I want it to be fairly desaturated. I'm not looking for anything vibrant, especially in some of the smaller detailed bits like the trousers and stuff. I want there to be contrast but not necessarily vibrancy. I'm just adding white to the colour. So this will give us a much brighter colour, very simply, but without any high saturation levels. This is where we get once we have all of the clothing painted in this kind of blue tone. After that, I'm moving on to the skin. For this particular skin tone, I am using a dark brown. I think it is Rhinox hide that I'm starting as a base. Again, I'm happy to leave black in some of the deepest shadowed areas. And just paint up, thinking about the overall shapes, where the light would hit, and only leaving black in the very darkest areas. This is where we get once we have a nice base of this dark brown colour. And we start painting up from there. I do want the skin to have nice saturation to it, as it's something that we all look at and pay more attention to than the clothing. So I'm not just going to be adding white here and end up with a very pale brown. I am going up. I think now I am using something equivalent to Bugman's Glow from the Citadel range. And as you would expect, we are considering the shapes and we are doing another level of highlight. We want to leave an element of black in the very darkest areas. Then we want to leave this dark brown in the next darkest areas, but we want to paint the majority of it with this colour. This will be our mid-tone colour and should cover most of the skin on the model. These particular characters don't tend to be showing much face. They have these cool masks on them, and we will get to those later. And what you can do here is really thin that down, wick away the excess moisture on a paper towel or something, and then use that to glaze over the shadows that you think might be a little bit too dark. That will help to blend in the blacks to the dark browns to the tones that you have just used, softening that all up and making it a bit of a smoother blend. This takes us away from just having three direct colours of black, dark brown and the tones that we just used, and we end up with a bit more of a tonal variation. These models are fairly small, so I don't think I need a particularly big range of colours, so now I'm using something akin to Cadian Flesh Tone from Citadel's range, and I think in the end I end up using that, adding a bit of white or pale flesh or something, but this is pretty much the final highlight for the skin. And just as before, I'm going in, painting over a smaller area to make sure that I leave all of the tones on the work that I've done previously. I have been in a habit of just painting over the same shapes again and again, but then kind of the work that you did in the previous step is taken over. And so this is what we have in this particular example. It's a fairly quick but effective job. So now we have all of the miniatures with the clothes painted and the skin painted, and it's starting to come together. I've never painted an army before, if indeed that's what this is. I don't really know, I'm not a Warhammer person. Because there are so many, your eyes are kind of glancing across and skipping on all those smaller details that maybe aren't finished as nicely, and it kind of helps everything look better, at least in my opinion. So a significant part of these miniatures is the birds, the feathers. I've done some research on various birds and I found that a magpie has the colour scheme that I'm interested in using. It has this cool kind of bluey green turquoisey colour on the back, and then predominantly we have lots of black and white, and I thought that might look quite striking and it would play into the kind of black shadows and black lining and stuff that I was interested in using in the beginning. So I found some reference photos and got an idea of the patterns that we have across the feathers and the wings. I'm starting with these big ones because we have most of a wing to use. Elements of feather is in the cast, in the model, but not particularly predominantly. So when painting them, I'm going to do a fairly flat blue, the same dark sea blue that we used previously. And then when I go into the highlight layers, I'm going to do that kind of in stripes, in patches, to give it a textured or feathery look in the end. At least that's the plan. So again, I'm just adding white, but I am adding a little bit of green this time to give it that kind of turquoise effect that I saw in the reference photos. So we're going from the dark blue up to a somewhat desaturated light blue green colour. I do right at the very end decide to filter with some blue-green ink mixes to change the colour on some of them a little bit, but entirely unnecessary. I just thought it was cool to give it a little bit of tonal variety, and it did bump up the saturation of some of them, but as I said before, I'm going for a fairly low saturation, higher contrast effect, not necessarily really vibrant colours. Just want these to be kind of dark and creepy. So that's the inside of the wing done. Move on to the outside of the wing, and it's fairly simple. I'm a little concerned how I'm going to get across a textured effect on the black part of the wings. I don't want it to look like I've just not painted it. But looking at the reference photo, it is fairly flat back and fairly flat white in terms of the colours. It's not like it particularly textured or contrasty or anything. It is very, very flat white feathers. So that's what I'm going to do, and we'll see what happens. And this is what we have when we paint the other wing. And then I'm going to take that idea across all of the miniatures. So we're going to have this theme of white, black, and then this blue-green across all of the miniatures. They all have various cloaks and feather parts on them. And we have some of them with birds, so I can paint those up. And that ties in really nicely. Obviously, the clothes are a similar colour, but we can see that it all is starting to come together. And I think that the addition of the white has really added to the model. Not going to go into a great detail, but there's lots of belts and straps and things. I paint that up in the same way. We start with the dark brown, and then I fairly quickly layer over that with a lighter brown, just to give it a element of contrast. Not many of them, but some of them have these big kind of cloak or long material effects. And I'm going to paint those in a magenta colour. That will contrast a lot with the blue to give it a heavy contrast, and I think it would just look cool. But painting a magenta or a red over black will be very difficult. So you have to imagine that you've painted up the cloak as you want it to be, and then you've taken a photo of it and desaturated that photo. What would that look like? So we are doing just a grayscale. So we're using black, grey, white, that sort of thing to show where the highlights and the shadows will be. Obviously, we're not considering colour at all at this point. Then once I have that down, I basically go over it with a kind of between a glaze and a wash. It doesn't matter if it's a bit thicker. Just slap it on, and this particular colour is very transparent, so it will not show very well over the blacks, and it will tint the whites heavily. So we end up getting what we had before with our kind of grayscale sketch, but with the colour turned on. Naturally, everything does blend together, so it doesn't go quite as bright or quite as dark, but there's still enough contrast for me. And this is what it looks like when we have the whole thing slapped over with a bit of magenta. Now, I wasn't sure what to do with the masks until this point, and that's why I left it till almost the end, but I've decided I really like the white standing out, and on some of the characters there's not quite enough white for me, so I've decided to go with painting the masks white. Kind of makes sense, it's supposed to be bone and skull-like. I've decided to tint using glaze method the tips of some of these with that magenta just to tie that in. I figured that could be a stain. And that's then the army done. So we have this nice theme that fits across all of the models. I am very happy with this first army, if that's what it is, painted, and I think it looks really cool. And that's, I think, an important thing to take away when you're miniature painting. I am happy with these models and happy to move on to the next project. So until the next one, bye!